And the rain was coming down hard that night, slamming against the windows of the old Bailey family house like it wanted to break them. I was 22, still figuring out my place in the world, when everything I knew got ripped out from under me. My name's Nora Bailey, and I'd been pouring my heart into designing interiors, dreaming of turning my dad's small hotel chain into something special. But that night, my dad, Richard, didn't see his little girl anymore. He saw a thief. "Get out, Nora. You're no daughter of mine." His voice boomed over the storm, sharp as a knife. He was 55, gray creeping into his hair, but his eyes burned with a fury I'd never seen before. He stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the warm light from inside, convinced I'd stolen $3 million from the family business. I dropped to my knees on the porch, the wood slick and cold, rain soaking through my jeans. "Dad, I didn't do it. Please, just hear me out." My throat was raw, my words barely cutting through the wind howling around us. Thunder crashed, and he didn't even flinch. Behind him, Claudia stepped forward, her lips curling into that smug little smile I'd hated since she married Dad 6 years ago. She was 48, a washed-up model who'd latched onto him after Mom died when I was 8. In her manicured fingers, she held Mom's pearl necklace, the one thing I had left of her, the one I'd begged Dad to keep safe. "You thought you could play us, didn't you?" Claudia said, her voice dripping with poison. She tossed the necklace at me like it was trash. It hit the ground, the clasp snapping open, pearls scattering into the mud. I lunged for it, desperate, but Logan, my half-brother, was faster. At 25, Logan was already running one of Dad's hotels, strutting around like he owned the world. He shoved me back with his boot, sending me sprawling into a puddle. "You're done, Nora. Get the hell out." He spat, his eyes cold as the rain pelting my face. My hand scrabbled in the dirt, trying to grab the pearls, but then Aunt Margaret chimed in from the porch. She was 60, Dad's older sister, the family's penny-pinching accountant. She clutched her sweater tight, glaring at me like I was some kind of disease. "You don't deserve the Bailey name. Get lost, and don't come crawling back." Her voice was shrill, cutting through the storm. I looked up at Dad one last time, rain mixing with the tears I couldn't hold back. "Dad, please. I'd never steal from you. You know me." But he just grabbed my suitcase, already packed like they'd planned this, and hurled it past me into the yard. It landed with a splash, dirty water soaking my legs. Claudia smirked again, crossing her arms. "Take your junk and go." Before I could get up, Logan yanked the gate open and kicked me hard in the ribs. I stumbled forward, crashing into the iron bars, pain shooting through my side. I reached for the suitcase, my fingers trembling, and caught a glint of the pearls in the mud. I managed to snatch a few, clutching them tight as blood trickled from a cut on my hand where I'd scraped it on a rock. "Trust me, Dad," I choked out, but he was already turning away. The door slammed shut, the lock clicking like a gunshot. The gate clanged behind me, and just like that, I was out in the street, the only home I'd ever known, fading into the dark. The rain didn't let up, pounding me as I dragged that busted suitcase down the road. My jacket was soaked through, the wind tearing at it, but I couldn't stop moving. I didn't have time to fall apart, not yet. A week earlier, I'd seen the company books, my name scribbled on withdrawals I'd never made. The handwriting wasn't mine. It was too neat, too deliberate. I'd tried to tell Dad, but Claudia had him on a leash ever since Mom passed. She'd spent years whispering in his ear, turning him against me, making sure Logan got the spotlight while I was left in the shadows. Margaret was her sidekick, always eager to please, probably the one who faked those signatures. They'd set me up, and I'd been too trusting to see it coming. I stumbled through the storm, the streetlights flickering like they were giving up too. My ribs throbbed where Logan had kicked me, and the cut on my hand stung like hell, but I kept going. I didn't know where. I just had to get away. By the time the rain slowed, I was shivering under the overhang of a beat-up gas station. the kind with grimy windows and a clerk who didn't care. I dug into my pocket, pulled out my last $10, and handed it over for a coffee that tasted like burnt dirt and a pack of crackers. I slid down against the wall, the cold concrete biting into my back, and stared at the broken pearls in my hand. They were all I had left of Mom, and I wasn't letting them go. That night, sitting there with my knees pulled up, the weight of it all hit me. My family didn't just kick me out, they'd erased me. Claudia wanted me gone, Logan wanted the throne, and Margaret wanted the cash. Dad? He'd let them do it. I wiped my face, the rain and tears smearing together, and made a promise to myself. I'd survive this. I'd come back, and when I did, they'd regret every second of what they'd done to me. The weeks after that night blurred into a haze of survival. I ended up in some nowhere town, the kind with more pawn shops than stoplights, renting a roach-infested room that smelled like mildew and regret. The walls were thin, stained with God knows what, and the mattress sagged so bad I could feel the springs digging into my back. I'd lie there at night, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the couple next door scream at each other, wondering how the hell I'd fallen this far. I was 22, a designer with big dreams, and now I was nothing. To eat, I took a job slinging drinks at a dive bar called Rusty's, a hole-in-the-wall joint off the highway. The pay was garbage, $5 an hour plus tips, if you could call the crumpled singles and pocket change tips. The regulars were a mix of truckers, drunks, and guys who thought a wink and a leer meant I owed them something. One night, a guy in a stained flannel grabbed my wrist as I set down his beer. "You're too pretty to be here, honey," he slurred, his breath reeking of whiskey and bad decisions. I yanked my arm free and told him to keep his hands to himself, which got me a glare from the boss, Tony. "Don't scare off the customers, Nora," he'd growl, like I was the problem. The bar closed late, and I'd stumble home in the dark, too broke for a cab, clutching a busted umbrella I'd fished out of a dumpster. My hands were chapped from scrubbing sticky tables, my stomach a constant knot of hunger. I'd press my fist against it to quiet the growling, living off stale bar pretzels and instant noodles I cooked on a hot plate that sparked every time I plugged it in. One night, a woman in a cheap leopard print coat stiffed me on a $20 tab and left a napkin with "Nice try, loser" scrawled in lipstick. I stuffed it in my pocket, too tired to care. Things hit a new low about a month in. I was walking back from a double shift, rain soaking through my sneakers, when a guy in a rusted pickup rolled up beside me. He leaned out the window, his grin all teeth. "Need a ride? I got a job for you. Easy cash." I was desperate. Rent due in 2 days, my last $5 already spent on a loaf of bread. Against every instinct screaming at me, I got in. He drove to an alley behind a warehouse, the kind of place that stinks of trouble. When he cut the engine, his hand shot to my hair, yanking me toward the back seat. "You're gonna earn this the fun way," he sneered. Panic exploded in my chest. I fumbled in my coat, found a shard of glass I'd kept from a broken bottle at work, and slashed at his arm. He cursed, blood spraying, and I bolted. I ran until my lungs burned, ducking into a dumpster to hide, the stench of rotting trash choking me as I shook there for hours. My shoulder throbbed where he'd grabbed me, a bruise already blooming under my sleeve. I didn't sleep that night, just sat there with my knees up, clutching that glass shard like it was my only friend. I was done. Done with this town, done with scraping by, done with being a punching bag for the world. A week later, I was nursing a flat beer in the cheapest bar I could find, a place so dim you couldn't see the stains on the floor. I just wanted to sit, to think, to figure out how to claw my way out of this pit. That's when he slid onto the stool next to me. Miles. He was 38, wiry, with a faded leather jacket and hands that looked like they'd seen some fights, scarred knuckles catching the faint light. He lit a cigarette, the flame flickering across his face, and gave me a once-over. "Rough night?" he asked, exhaling smoke. I shrugged. not in the mood for small talk, staring into my glass like it had answers. "You look like you've been through hell," he said, tapping ash into a chipped tray, "and not the kind you walk away from easy." I didn't answer, just took a sip of the warm, bitter beer. He didn't push, just kept talking. "Name's Miles. Used to dig up dirt for a living. Reporter, big city stuff. Till I got burned on a story that wasn't mine. Lost everything. Now I'm here, picking myself up. You look like you're at that point too." I glanced at him, his eyes steady on mine, and something made me nod. "Yeah," I muttered. "Nothing left." He leaned in, voice low. "I've seen people like you before, kicked down, counted out, but you've got that spark, the kind that says, you're not done. If you want to survive this, you've got to beat the bastards who think they're better than you. I can help." I didn't trust him, not yet, but I had no moves left, so I started talking. About Dad, about Claudia twisting him, about Logan and Margaret framing me for that $3 million lie, how they'd tossed me out like garbage. Left me with nothing but Mom's broken pearls and a cut-up hand. Miles listened, smoking slow, nodding like he'd heard it all before but still cared. When I finished, he stubbed out his cigarette and looked me dead in the eye. "They think you're gone, Nora. They're wrong. You've got fight in you. I can see it. Let me show you how to use it. We'll make them wish they'd never crossed you." He stuck out his hand, rough and steady. I stared at it for a second, my heart thudding. I had nothing. No money, no plan, no hope. But maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't done. I took his hand, my grip shaky but firm. "Okay," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "Let's do it." He grinned, sharp and real, and just like that, something shifted. For the first time since that stormy night, I felt a flicker of something. Anger, sure, but also possibility. Miles didn't promise me the world, but he gave me a lifeline, and I was damn well gonna grab it with both hands. The next morning, I met Miles at a rundown diner across town, the kind with chipped mugs and waitresses who didn't bother smiling. My ribs still ached from Logan's kick months ago, and my hands were rough from bar work, but I showed up. Miles was already there, nursing a black coffee, a stack of newspapers spread out in front of him. "You're late," he said, not looking up. "Sorry," I muttered, sliding into the booth. "Bus broke down." He pushed a cup my way. "Drink. We've got work to do." Work meant starting from nothing. Miles had this tiny office, a closet really, in a strip mall that smelled like old carpet and desperation. One desk, a flickering lamp, and a laptop he'd patched together from spare parts. He'd been a hot-shot investigative reporter once, digging up scandals that made headlines, until a source double-crossed him and he took the fall. Now he was scratching by, taking odd jobs exposing small-time crooks. "You're not just gonna survive, Nora," he told me that first day, his voice rough but sure. "You're gonna build something they can't touch." He started teaching me how to dig, not with a shovel but with questions, how to spot lies in numbers, how to follow money trails. We'd sit in that cramped room, him showing me how to read financial reports on the laptop, pointing out red flags in local businesses. "See this?" he'd say, tapping the screen. "They're cooking the books, hiding losses. You find the weak spot, you've got leverage." I'd nod, scribbling notes on a legal pad, my eyes burning from the glare. I wasn't good at it yet, but I was hungry, hungrier than I'd ever been. At night, I'd crash on a cot in the corner of the office, too broke to keep my apartment. I'd quit Rusty's after a month with Miles, tired of dodging grabby hands for peanuts. We made cash by selling tips to lawyers, dirt on shady contractors, proof of tax evasion. It wasn't much, but it kept us going. Then one day, Miles tossed a flyer on the desk. "Take a look." It was an ad for a failing furniture company, Harper & Sons, about to go under. "They make decent stuff," he said, "just mismanaged. You're a designer. Fix it." I'd always loved designing. Spaces, furniture, anything that turned chaos into something beautiful. Before Dad kicked me out, I'd sketched ideas for his hotels, dreaming of warm lobbies and sleek rooms. Harper & Sons was a long shot, but I saw potential in their beat-up catalog. Solid wood frames, just ugly finishes. Miles scraped together every cent we had, and I pitched in the last of my savings. $800 from pawning my old watch. We bought a chunk of the company dirt cheap, right before the bank could swallow it whole. The first few weeks were brutal. I worked out of their dusty warehouse, sanding down tables myself, tweaking designs late into the night. My hands blistered, my back screamed, but I kept going. Miles handled the numbers, sweet-talking suppliers into giving us credit. I came up with a new line. Simple, modern pieces with bold colors, and we hustled to get them into local stores. For a while, it looked like we'd tanked. Sales were flat, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat picturing Claudia's smirk if I failed. Then, out of nowhere, a boutique hotel in the city ordered 50 pieces for their remodel. The check cleared, and we were in the black. That win lit a fire under me. I quit sleeping on the cot, rented a tiny studio with a real bed, and poured everything into Harper & Sons. Miles and I moved to a bigger space, a real office with windows that didn't leak, and I hired a small crew. I'd sketch designs in the mornings, meet clients in the afternoons, and check production at night. We expanded, landing deals with bigger chains, and I started seeing my name, Nora Bailey, on tags in showrooms. 5 years in, we were turning millions. By year 12, Harper & Sons was a brand people knew, a company I'd built from a pile of sawdust and spite. I was 34 now, standing in my office downtown, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling glass. The city sprawled out below me, lights twinkling like they were cheering me on. I'd traded my ripped jeans for a tailored blazer, my calluses for a pen that signed 7-figure contracts. On my neck, Mom's pearl necklace hung, restrung and polished, the broken pieces made whole again. I'd found it in a pawn shop 2 years back, tracked it down after Claudia sold it off. Buying it back felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Miles walked in, tossing his jacket on a chair. He was 50 now, still wiry, still sharp, his hair streaked with silver. "Nice view," he said, pouring himself a water from the pitcher on my desk. "You've come a long way from that bar stool." I smiled, small but real. We both have. He'd stuck with me through every rough patch, when we lost half our cash on a bad supplier deal. When I wanted to quit after a big client bailed, he'd slam a coffee down and say, "You're not built to fold, Nora. Keep swinging." And I did. I turned from the window, my fingers brushing the pearls. 12 years. I'd clawed my way up, turned hunger into power, built an empire they couldn't ignore. Harper & Sons wasn't just furniture. It was proof I didn't need the Bailey name to matter. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Dad, Claudia, Logan, Margaret. They'd thought I'd disappear, that I'd break. They were wrong, and it was time they knew it. I set my coffee down, the mug clinking against the glass desk. "Miles," I said, my voice steady, "we've got everything we need now. Money, connections, leverage." He raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "You're ready to go after them?" It wasn't a question. I nodded, my jaw tight. They tore me down, kicked me out like I was nothing. Now it's my turn. He studied me for a second, then grinned, that sharp, dangerous grin I'd come to trust. "All right, boss. Where do we start?" "Margaret," I said, the name bitter on my tongue. "She's first, then Logan, Claudia and Dad. They'll wait. I want them to see it coming." Miles cracked his knuckles, leaning forward. "Margaret's still in that house, hoarding her cut of the family money. Logan's running the hotels, or what's left of them. We've got dirt on both. Let's make it hurt." I felt a surge, something dark and alive waking up inside me. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice, and I'd waited 12 years to serve it cold. 12 years had sharpened me, and now it was time to cut. Margaret was first on my list, the aunt who'd screeched at me to get lost that rainy night, her bony fingers clutching her sweater like it could shield her from her own guilt. She was 72 now, still living in that same creaky house on the edge of town, surrounded by dusty furniture and piles of cash she'd siphoned from Dad's hotels over the years. I'd watched her from a distance, keeping tabs through old contacts Miles dug up. She hadn't changed. Still paranoid, still greedy, still thinking she'd gotten away with framing me. I started small, subtle. Miles had a guy who could pull records, old ledgers from the hotel chain, the ones with my name forged in Margaret's tight, spidery handwriting. I sent her the first page in an unmarked envelope, just a photocopy with my signature circled in red and a note scratched in block letters. Karma's coming. No return address, no hint of me. A week later, I sent another, this time with a line from the fake withdrawal highlighted. 3 million gone. Your idea. Miles tracked her reaction through a buddy who lived nearby. She stopped going out, started peeking through her curtains like a scared rabbit. Then I turned up the heat. Margaret had always been superstitious, jumping at shadows, muttering about curses when Mom died. I remembered her yelling that night, "Get lost and don't come crawling back," like she thought I'd haunt her. Now I'd use that against her. I hired a lowlife Miles knew, some guy with a raspy voice and no questions. He'd call her house at midnight, let it ring twice, then whisper, "Can you hear Nora's mom yet?" before hanging up. After 3 nights, Miles said she'd unplugged her phone, but the damage was done. She was unraveling. I pushed harder. I paid a locksmith to slip a single pearl, one from Mom's necklace, under her front door while she slept. She found it the next morning, and Miles' contact said she screamed loud enough to wake the neighbors, babbling about ghosts. By the end of the week, her curtains stayed shut and she'd stopped answering the door. That's when I brought in the big gun. Margaret loved her psychics, those con artists she'd pay to cleanse her house. I found one she trusted, a guy named Victor with a fake beard and a knack for drama. I doubled his usual fee to flip the script. Victor showed up at her place, sage bundle smoking, muttering nonsense about spirits. He told her a vengeful ghost tied to the Bailey name was cursing her, feeding on tainted money. She bought it, hook, line, and sinker. He said the only way to break it was to sign over her savings, purge the cash she'd stolen. She scribbled her name on the papers he slid her, hands shaking. And just like that, her accounts emptied into a shell company I'd set up, millions she'd hoarded, gone in a heartbeat. I couldn't resist the final touch. I drove to her house myself that night, the street quiet except for the wind rattling her old shutters. She opened the door, pale as death, her eyes wild. "Who's there?" she croaked. I stepped into the light, dropping the stack of forged ledgers on her doorstep. "You taught me how to survive, Margaret," I said, my voice flat, cold. "Now I'm teaching you how to lose everything." She lunged at me, shrieking, but I turned and walked away as she collapsed, sobbing into the dark. A month later, I heard she'd boarded up her windows, muttering to herself, a shell of the woman who'd helped ruin me. Logan was next, and he wouldn't go down quiet. At 37, he'd clawed his way to CEO of what was left of Dad's hotel chain, strutting around in tailored suits, firing workers to pad his bonuses. I'd been buying shares for years through dummy companies, keeping my name off the books. Miles worked the details, quiet and steady, while I waited for the perfect moment. It came at their annual shareholder meeting. I walked into the boardroom, black blazer crisp, hair pulled back tight, and took a seat near the back. Logan didn't even clock me, too busy preening at the head of the table. The chairman called for motions, and I stood. "I move to remove Logan Bailey as CEO effective immediately," I said, loud enough to bounce off the walls. The room went still, forks pausing halfway to mouths. Logan's head snapped up, his face turning red. "Who the hell are you?" he shouted, veins bulging in his neck. I locked eyes with him, stepping forward. "I'm the sister you kicked into the mud 12 years ago, and I own enough of this company to bury you." His fists hit the table, but the vote was quick. I'd secured the shares. He was out, escorted from the building by security, screaming the whole way. He didn't take it lying down. 2 nights later, I was driving home, city lights blurring past, when a black SUV swerved into my lane. My tires screeched as I jerked the wheel, the car spinning off the road into a ditch. I barely unbuckled before 2 guys in hoods jumped me. One swung a bat at my head. I ducked, but it grazed my shoulder, pain exploding down my arm. The other grabbed me from behind, his arm tight around my throat. I stomped his foot hard, hearing a crack, then slammed my elbow into his gut. He let go, and I bolted into the trees, heart hammering, branches clawing at my face. I hid in the dark, crouched behind a fallen log, until their footsteps faded. Miles found me an hour later, his truck rumbling down a back road. I climbed in, mud-streaked and shaking, and he handed me a burner phone. "Logan's behind it," he said, voice tight. "Plates trace back to a guy he knows. Hired muscle." We didn't go to the cops. Instead, Miles set up a meet with one of the hitmen, cash changing hands in a parking lot. The guy flipped, spilling it all on video. Logan paid him $5,000 to make me disappear. I uploaded it the next morning, tagging every news outlet I could find. By noon, cops were at Logan's penthouse, dragging him out in cuffs. Headlines screamed fraud, assault, attempted murder. He got life, no parole. I mailed him a blank hotel invoice from Harper & Sons, scribbled with one line, "Welcome to the hell you built me." Miles leaned against my office desk that night, a beer in hand, watching the news replay Logan's mugshot. "2 down," he said, glancing at me. "You good?" I nodded, staring at the screen, my shoulder still throbbing under a bandage. "Yeah, but it's not over." Claudia and Dad were still out there, living like they'd won. I grabbed my coat, the weight of Mom's pearls steady against my neck. "Let's keep going," I told him. He finished his drink and followed me out. The game wasn't done yet. Logan was rotting in a cell. Margaret was a ghost of herself, and now it was Claudia's turn. She'd been the architect of it all. 12 years ago, she'd twisted Dad's mind, planted the lies that got me thrown out. At 60, she was still living high, lounging in a gaudy mansion bought with what was left of the hotel fortune, acting like she'd never shattered my life. I'd spent years building my case, and Miles had dug deep. Offshore accounts, fake invoices, proof she'd skimmed millions long before they pinned it on me. I didn't waste time. I bundled the evidence, bank statements, emails, her signature on shady deals, and sent it to the press in anonymous drops. Within days, the story blew up. Headlines screamed, "Hotel heiress caught in fraud scandal," and the feds moved fast. They seized her accounts, her mansion went up for auction, and her so-called friends scattered like rats. I watched from my office, the city skyline dark outside, as news clips showed her storming out of court, hair a mess, yelling at cameras. She got 20 years, fraud, conspiracy, the works. But Claudia wasn't one to go quietly. She hit back, filing a lawsuit from jail claiming I'd faked the evidence to frame her. Her lawyers were slick, digging up dirt, and they got a judge to issue a warrant. Next thing I knew, cops were cuffing me outside Harper & Sons, hauling me in for questioning. Miles shouted after me, "Hang on, Nora, we'll fix this," as they shoved me into a squad car. I spent 3 weeks locked up, awaiting trial, and Claudia made sure it hurt. She'd paid off a couple of inmates, 2 women who cornered me in the cell block one night. One pinned my arms while the other slammed a fist into my stomach. "This is from your stepmom," she hissed, landing a punch on my jaw that split my lip. I fought back, kicking one in the shin and smashing my elbow into the other's face, but they kept coming. Guards broke it up, but I was a mess. Bruised ribs, blood dripping down my chin. I slept with one eye open after that, dodging shanks and glares, counting the days. Miles worked non-stop outside, calling in favors. He tracked down a gold mine, An old recording from a party years back, Claudia drunk on champagne, bragging to a friend about fixing the books to ditch the He got it to my lawyer and we played it in court. Her voice crackled through the speakers, smug and clear. The judge's face hardened and the case flipped. Charges against me dropped and Claudia's sentence stuck. I walked out of jail, free, my name cleared. A week later, I visited her. She sat across from me in an orange jumpsuit, her hair greasy, eyes burning with hate. I pulled Mom's pearl necklace from my pocket. I'd bought it back from her auction junk just for this. You said I didn't deserve anything, I told her, tossing it at her face. It hit her cheek and clattered to the floor. You've got nothing now? I've got it all. She lunged at the glass between us, screaming, You'll pay for this, you little bitch! I turned and walked out, her voice echoing uselessly behind me. She'd rot there, powerless, exactly as I'd planned. Dad was last. He was 67, a shadow of the man who'd roared at me that stormy night, holed up in a cheap assisted living place after the hotels tanked. I found him in a faded armchair, staring at a blank TV, his hands trembling as he tried to stand. Nora, he croaked, his voice weak. I messed up, kid. I'm sorry. I didn't move, arms crossed, the years between us heavy. You picked them over me, I said, keeping it even. Where are they now, Dad? He sank back, tears welling up. But I wasn't done. I pulled an old photo from my bag, me, him, and Mom, smiling before everything broke, and tore it in half, right in front of him. He flinched, a choked sob escaping. Then I saw it, a yellowed letter in a drawer by his bed, dated a week after he'd kicked me out. In his shaky handwriting, it read, Nora, I shouldn't have believed her. I was wrong. Come home. My breath caught. Claudia must have hidden it, kept it from me all these years. I tried to fix it, he said, voice breaking. She threatened you, said she'd hurt you worse if I didn't play along. I was too late. I stared at him, the letter crumpled in my hand. He wasn't evil, just weak, a puppet in her game. He started crying, full-on sobs, and I didn't know what to feel. Anger, pity, something in between. After a minute, I dropped the letter on his lap and pulled a check from my pocket, $5,000, enough to cover his bills for a bit. Take care of yourself, I said, turning for the door. Please, don't go, he called, but I kept walking. Miles was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his truck. I got in, slamming the door, and he drove off without a word. Dad died a few months later, alone, his obit a footnote in the local paper. Back at the office, Miles tossed his jacket on a chair, cracking open a beer. It's done, he said, watching me pace. Claudia's locked up, Logan's gone, Margaret's a wreck, Dad's out of the picture, you good. I stopped, staring at the pearls on my desk. Yeah, I said, short and sharp, but something gnawed at me, a loose thread I couldn't place. Miles took a swig, then set the bottle down, his eyes flicking to mine. There's something I need to tell you. I turned, frowning. What? He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous tic I'd seen 100 times. I didn't just stumble into that bar 12 years ago. I was looking for you. My stomach dropped. What the hell does that mean? He exhaled, slow and heavy. Richard, your dad. He was my dad too, a fling he had before you were born. He ditched me and my mom, left us with nothing. I grew up hearing about the Baileys, hating them. When I found you, I saw a chance. To help you, sure, but also to burn them down. Every step, I was settling my score too. I stared at him, the room tilting. Miles, my rock, my partner, was my half-brother? The guy who'd pulled me out of alleys, who'd fought beside me, had his own revenge driving him? You used me? I asked, voice low. He shook his head fast. No, it started that way, yeah, but it changed. Your family, Nora, not just blood. I'd do it all again, no agenda. I didn't know what to say, the twist sinking in. He'd hidden it, but he'd stayed. I grabbed my coat, needing air. "Let's go," I said. He followed, quiet, and we left the past smoldering behind us. The dust settled slow after that night. Claudia was behind bars. Logan was a memory in a prison cell. Margaret was lost to her own mind, and Dad was gone. I'd spent 12 years fighting, building something unbreakable out of nothing, tearing down everyone who'd tried to break me. Now it was over, and the silence felt strange, like a weight I wasn't used to carrying. Miles, my half-brother, my anchor, stuck around handling the numbers at Harper & Sons, cracking dumb jokes to pull me out of my head. One morning, I sold the old Bailey house. The bank had foreclosed it years back, and I'd bought it cheap, not for nostalgia, but to bury it. The cash went to a scholarship fund, something for kids from rough homes, kids like I'd been, scrambling for a shot. It wasn't much, but it felt right, a scrap of good from all the mess. Miles helped me set it up, late nights over takeout, sorting applications on my living room floor. "You're softer now," he said once, tossing a file aside. "Less pissed off?" I smirked, grabbing a slice of pizza. "Maybe I'm just tired." He laughed. "Nah, you're living again." Summer came, and Miles dragged me to a cabin by a lake a couple hours out of the city. It was small, all wood walls and a creaky porch, but the view stretched forever, water glinting under the sun, trees whispering in the breeze. We fished off the dock with cheap rods, me laughing when he tangled his line in the weeds. That night, we sat by a fire out back, the crackle of logs filling the quiet. I leaned back, beer in hand, the heat warming my legs. "This is it," I said, more to myself than him, what I was missing. He slipped an arm around my shoulders, steady as always. "You've got it now." I looked out at the lake, Mom's pearls cool against my neck, and smiled. I was free.